Dear learners, welcome back to your educational channel Learn and Educate. In the past few videos, we have learned about a few definitions and now we will continue from definition 2 clause 17 onwards. Section 2 clause 17 states about public officer. Who can be termed as a public officer and the persons who are falling under the definition of public officer are described as below. Section 2 clause 17 public officer. Public officer means a person falling under any of the following descriptions as every judge, B. every member of all India service, C. every person commissioned or gazetted officer in the military, that is Navy or Air Forces of the Union government while serving under the government. Any person who is commissioned as a Navy officer or an Army officer or an air officer of the central government who is serving under the government for the time being. A person who has been termed as a gazetted officer who is designated as a gazetted officer in the Navy or Air Force, military air forces of the Union government while serving under the government. Then section 2 clause 17 subclause D, every person, every officer of a court of justice whose duty is to investigate, to report on any matter of law or facts, or make authenticate or to make authenticate or keep any document, or to take charge of dispose of any property or to execute any judicial process or to administer any oath or to interpret or reserve order in the court, and every person especially authorized by the court of justice to perform any of such duties. Let us further bifurcate into small parts and understand about subclause D. It mentions that every officer or every person, every officer of the court of justice who is duty bound as an officer to investigate, any officer, it may include persons other than the judge also, in the court of law, in a court of justice, in a civil court, the persons, any officer who has been authorized, who is designated as an officer to investigate. It is his duty to report on any matter of law, any matter of fact, to make a authenticate or any to make or authenticate any document, to keep any document in his custody. First of all, to investigate, to order, to make, to report on any matter subject to law of facts, subject to question of facts, question of law, fact of the cases. He make authenticate to keep document. He can make the document, he can form the documents, he can authenticate a particular documents, he can sign it, or he can accuracy about the document, the authenticity of the document, and he can keep document is in own custody. The officer further, the officer can take charge or dispose of any property, or the officer can execute any judicial process, or the officer can administer any oath when in the case of giving, appearing as an evidence proves, when a person is showing to the justice, to the court as an evidence, so taking them on oath, administration of an oath, or to interpret an order, to reserve an order in the court of law. To reserve means to keep, to custody, is to keep the custody of the order, to interpret the order in the court of law, and every person specially authorized by the court of justice to perform such duties. Which means in a court of law, a person, an officer who investigates, who reports, who make reports on any matter of law or fact, he authenticate or keep the documents, or take charge or dispose of any properties. Yes, then what, he execute any judicial process. Execution of any judicial process includes many other things done by the officer of the court. Yes, done by the officer in a court of law. He can administer oath, any oath. He can interpret the order, he can reserve the order in the court, and every person who is specially authorized by the court to perform such other duties for the justice, in a court of law. Then further, Section 2, Clause 17, Subclause E. Every person who holds any office by virtue of which he is empowered to place or keep an person in confinement. The power which empower him to keep the places, to place or to keep any person in a confinement. Subclause F. Every officer of the court whose duty is as an officer to prevent offences, to give information of the offences, to stop the happening of the offences so as to prevent the measures, to prevent the offences, to give information of offences, to bring offences, to bring offences to justice or to protect the public health, safety or convenience. And subclause G. Every officer of the government whose duty as an officer is to take, receive, keep, or expend any document on behalf of the government or to make any survey, assess, or contract on the behalf of the government or to execute any revenue process to investigate or to report on any matter affecting the pecuniary interest of the government. When every officer of the government is his duty as an officer to receive, to keep, to expend any property on behalf of the government, he can survey, he can assess, he can make assessment, he can contract on behalf of the government for execution of in the revenue process to investigate. We have seen in the clause previously, this is the few of these points in the clause D of an officer in a court of law, and that has been repeated in the with respect to the government. Their government is performing on behalf of the government to execute in a revenue process, to investigate, to report any matter affecting the pecuniary interest of the government. Clause further as to make, authenticate, or keep any document relating to the pecuniary interest of the government. Here is to prevent infraction